So, I want you to cast your mind back for a second. It is April 26, 2009.
Oh, wow. Going way back.
Yeah, I mean, the global economy is just in absolute free fall from the financial crisis.
Right.
And if you turned on the radio, the Black Eyed Peas are completely dominating the airwaves with Boom Pow.
I remember it well.
Right. And on a Sunday night on this channel that honestly was mostly known for showing old westerns and maybe some classic movies, there was this show about a high school chemistry teacher. And it is quietly just sort of struggling to find its footing. We are right in the middle of season 2 of Breaking Bad.
And, context really is everything here.
Yeah.
Because in 2009, Breaking Bad was not the massive cultural monolith that it is today.
Not at all.
It was a critical darling, sure. I mean, critics absolutely loved it, but the viewership was modest. It was a cult hit at best, really.
Yeah, it was very under the radar.
Exactly. And Tony, up until this specific point, the show was this gritty, almost suffocatingly intense neo-Western.
Suffocating is a good word for it.
It was beige. It was silent. It was incredibly grim.
It honestly felt a bit like No Country for Old Men, but adapted for basic cable. You had these high stakes, very low dialogue, and just lots of wind blowing through the desert.
Precisely. It was essentially a tragedy playing out in slow motion. And then right in the 8th episode of the 2nd season, the writers, specifically Peter Gould, decided to do something incredibly risky. They decided to basically open a side door to this intense tragedy and let a clown walk in.
And that is the exact moment the universe expands. So we are doing a deep dive today into the episode titled, appropriately enough, Better Call Saul.
It's a fantastic title.
It really is. And our mission today, for you listening, isn't just to recap the plot. You've seen the show. You know what happens. Our mission here is to investigate what I would call a creative accident.
A creative accident.
Yeah, I'd argue it is the most successful creative accident in television history. We're going to look at how a 47-minute episode of television, which was written essentially just to solve a temporary plot mechanics problem, ended up spawning a billion-dollar franchise.
It really did recontextualize the entire series.
Exactly. It introduced a character who was arguably never even meant to survive the season.
That is a very fair assessment. We are, of course, talking about the introduction of Saul Goodman.
Yeah.
And looking at the production notes you pulled for this deep dive, it is actually fascinating to see that Vince Gilligan, the creator and showrunner, wasn't even the primary architect of this character.
Right.
This was really Peter Gould's baby.
And that distinction really matters, doesn't it? Because Gilligan has this very specific voice. It's suspenseful. It's dread-inducing.
Very methodical.
Yes, exactly. But Gould brought a totally different flavor. If Gilligan is the master of suspense, Gould is really the master of satire. And when you drop a purely satirical character into a suspense thriller, the chemical reaction, yeah, pun intended there, it completely changes the entire viscosity of the show.
It is like a splash of neon orange in a completely beige world. It changes the entire color palette.
But before we get to the man himself, I think we have to look at the catalyst. Yeah, why do they even need a lawyer right at this moment?
Exactly. Why drop this flamboyant character into episode 8 of season 2?
Well, the plot engine really starts with Badger. Good old Badger.
Badger.
He gets busted sitting on a public bench that is, ironically enough, advertising the very lawyer who will eventually save him.
The irony is incredibly thick there. But let's break down the whole Save Badger problem structurally for a second. The writers were backed into a corner. Walt and Jesse are complete amateurs at this point. We tend to forget this later in the series and they become these untouchable kingpins. But right now, they're literally stumbling through the drug trade using dumb luck and high school chemistry.
Yeah, they're barely scraping by.
But getting arrested, that is a systemic problem.
Yeah.
You cannot fulminate of mercury your way out of a holding cell in the Albuquerque Police Department.
Right. They had hit a brick wall where their quote-unquote science just couldn't save them anymore. They needed a direct interface with the legal system, but they didn't go for some high-powered law and order type defense attorney.
No, not at all.
They went straight for the strip mall.
And that strip mall is honestly a character in itself. Let's really break down that waiting room scene because the set design tells us absolutely everything we need to know about Saul before he even opens his mouth.
Oh, it is almost nauseating to look at. You have these huge pillars, which are very clearly fake marble.
Very fake.
You have the receptionist, Francesca, who just looks like she would rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth. And then the wallpaper.
The wallpaper is the absolute key. It is a literal print of the U.S. Constitution.
Oh.
But it's cheap, it's peeling at the edges, and it's omnipresent.
It's everywhere.
It basically screams, I wrap myself in the law, but I absolutely do not respect it. It treats the Constitution like a cheap commodity, literally like wrapping paper. And sitting right there in that waiting room, Walt is wearing his disguises.
The hat, the sunglasses.
Yes, and he just looks ridiculous.
He looks exactly like a cartoon criminal, like he's wearing a bugler costume he bought at Party City on clearance.
Which is entirely the point. In Saul's world, everyone is a caricature.
Yeah.
And then Bob Odenkirk actually walks in. Now, we really have to pause on the casting here. This is crucial for you to understand if you're listening. Bob Odenkirk in 2009 was not a dramatic actor.
No, absolutely not. He was Mr. Show. He was a sketch comedy legend.
Right.
He was the guy you hired if you wanted absurdist alternative comedy.
Exactly. So casting him was a massive signal to the audience. It was telling them, hey, it's actually okay to laugh.
Because up until now, laughing at Breaking Bad felt almost wrong.
It felt too dark.
Yeah, way too heavy. But Odenkirk brings this incredible rhythm, this fast-talking patter that feels like it was lifted straight out of a 1940s screwball comedy. He talks faster than literally anyone else on the show.
He moves faster, too.
Yeah, he occupies so much more space in the frame.
There is a very specific line when Walt tries to bribe him that I want to highlight. Walt poses as Badger's uncle, Mr. Mayhew.
With the fake cop.
Yes, the cough. And he puts 10 grand in cash right on the desk. He thinks this is just how the criminal world works. You pay the bad man does the bad thing.
And Saul throws it right back at him. This is the first moment of real, genuine complexity for the character. He says, I'm not taking a bribe to throw a case.
Which is confusing for Walt. We are told he is a quote-unquote criminal lawyer. The emphasis being heavily on criminal. Why does he suddenly have ethics?
Right, where do the morals come from?
But it isn't ethics at all. It is risk management. And that is the true insight into Saul Goodman. He isn't an agent of chaos. He's actually an agent of order. He knows that taking a bribe from a complete stranger sitting in his own office is a one-way ticket to disbarment or a federal prison.
He has a code.
He has a code. It is a very twisted code, but it is undeniably there. He wants to manipulate the system by using the system, not by breaking it entirely. He prefers finding the loophole rather than swinging a sledgehammer.
So the bribe fails entirely. The nice way, or at least the transactional way, doesn't work out. So Walt and Jesse, being the absolute brilliant strategists they are...
Oh boy, here we go, the escalation.
Yeah, they decide to just escalate straight to violence. They decide to kidnap him. And this brings us to the desert.
Moving into section 2 of our deep dive, the desert scene.
I really want to spend a lot of time here because honestly, we could probably spend the entire hour talking about just this one 5-minute sequence.
We really could. If you are looking for the Rosetta Stone that connects Breaking Bad to the prequel spinoff Better Call Saul, it is literally buried right here in the sand.
So paint the picture for us, set the scene.
Well, it is night. It is incredibly dark. The wind is howling, which is a classic Breaking Bad soundscape choice. Walt and Jesse kidnap Saul. They throw a black hood over his head, and they drive him out to the middle of absolutely nowhere in the RV. They step out, and they have these cheap ski masks on, and there is a freshly dug grave right there, or at least what looks like one, and they threaten to kill him.
They just want to scare him into taking the bribe, basically. It's a very crude tactic. Do what we say, or else you go in the hole.
Right. It's very blunt. Yeah. But look closely at Saul's reaction. This is the absolute key to everything that follows. He doesn't say, please, I'm just a lawyer, or I'll give you the money. He starts screaming something very, very specific.
He screams, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio.
It was Ignacio. He shifts the blame instantly, without even thinking. And then, when Jesse, who Saul does not recognize at all because of the ski mask, when Jesse keeps the pressure on him, Saul asks the question that basically launched 1,000 fan theories.
Yeah.
He asks, Lalo didn't send you.
Lalo didn't send you.
And then, just to double down on his panic, he starts babbling in Spanish about being amigo del cartel. A friend of the cartel.
Okay, we really need to unpack this. Because in 2009, when this originally aired on television, those were just throwaway lines.
Right.
Completely throwaway.
Yeah.
And this is so important for people listening to understand about how television writing actually works. Peter Gould wrote those specific lines just to add a little flavor. Just some texture.
Exactly. To show that Saul is a guy who has some genuinely terrifying clients. The names Ignacio and Lalo were basically just phones. They were just sounds. They did not exist as fleshed out characters in a show Bible anywhere. They were just texture to make Saul look more entrenched in the underworld.
So for literally 6 years, those names just floated out there in the ether. They meant absolutely nothing to anyone.
Exactly. But this is where the absolute genius of the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul writers' room really comes into play. They practice this technique they call mining the history.
Right.
When they started writing the prequel series years later, they didn't try to invent a bunch of new antagonists from scratch. They literally went back, looked at the old footage of this exact episode, and asked themselves, what questions did we leave unanswered?
So they looked at this desert scene and simply said, well, who is Lalo?
And the answer they eventually came up with, Lalo Salamanca, turned out to be perhaps the most charismatic, utterly terrifying psychopath in the entire Breaking Bad universe. They took a completely throwaway line of panic and reverse-engineered an entire 6-season tragedy just to explain why he said it.
It fundamentally changes how you watch this scene now.
It really does.
Because when I watched this back in 2009, I just saw a sleazy lawyer who was scared of some generic drug thug. But when I watch it now, knowing exactly who Lalo Salamanca is, knowing what he did to Howard Hamlin, knowing the immense psychological torture he put Jimmy through, the terror in Bob Odenkirk's voice, it's entirely different.
Yep.
It isn't comic fear anymore. It is quite literally PTSD.
It becomes deeply tragic. And then there's the Ignacio line. It was Ignacio. He is throwing Nacho Varga completely under the bus to save his own skin.
Which is so heartbreaking in retrospect, because in the prequel, we see that Nacho actually sacrificed himself to save Saul and to save others. Nacho was really one of the very few people in that cartel world who actually treated Jimmy with some base level of respect.
It just shows you that Saul's sheer survival instinct will always override everything else, even basic gratitude.
Yeah.
But let's look at the actual pivot point of this scene. Saul realizes, looking at them, that Walt and Jesse are not sent by Lalo. They're clearly confused by the names.
Right. He realizes they have absolutely no idea who Lalo is.
And you just have to watch the physical body language shift here.
Yeah.
This is really Odenkirk's brilliance as a performer. He goes from being this trembling, sobbing victim to an annoyed, high-priced consultant in a literal nanosecond.
He brushes the dirt off his knees.
Yes. He stands up, brushes off his knees, completely changes his posture, and he says, "Why didn't you just say so?"
The relief, you can hear it so clearly in his voice. Oh, thank God. You're just the guys who want to save Badger.
It shifts from a cartel horror movie right back to a business negotiation in a split second. And honestly, this is Saul's real superpower. He reads the room better than anyone. He looks at them and realizes, okay, these guys are definitely dangerous. They have a gun, but they are complete amateurs. And amateurs with money always need a lawyer.
So he stands up, brushes off the dirt, and says, okay, put $1 in my pocket.
The famous dollar bill scene.
Right.
Attorney-client privilege.
Yeah.
It is basically a magic spell in his world. He takes that dollar and casts a legal shield over the entire operation. And just like that, with $1, he is no longer their victim. He is their legal advisor.
Which perfectly brings us to the actual practical solution for the Badger problem. Because despite all this drama in the desert, they still have to keep Badger out of jail. Or at the very least, they have to keep him from snitching on Walt to the DEA.
Right. Which brings us to Section 3 of our deep dive, the in and out scheme.
I absolutely love this concept. Saul introduces them to a guy named Jimmy In and Out Kilkelly.
It is such a cynical yet utterly brilliant piece of world building by the writers. Kilkelly is a professional fall guy. He literally makes a living by going to state or federal prison for other criminals.
Wait, I have to ask, is this a real thing? Do professional fall guys actually exist in the real world?
Oh, absolutely they do. Historically speaking, especially if you look back at the heyday of the American Mafia in the 70s and 80s, having a stand-in was a very known tactic. Maybe it wasn't as formalized as a guy literally named Jimmy In and Out, but the general concept of someone taking the rap in exchange for financial care for their family, that is a staple of organized crime.
That's just a pure transaction. You are literally buying their freedom.
Exactly. And Saul's execution of this plan is brilliant. He doesn't just hire a guy, he creates a whole narrative. He knows that the DEA really wants Heisenberg, but the DEA doesn't actually know what Heisenberg looks like yet.
Right, he's just a ghost.
So Saul decides to just give them a Heisenberg. He dresses Kilkelly up, puts him on that specific public bench, and fully orchestrates the bust.
It is entirely theatrical. Saul is essentially directing a stage play for the police department.
And Kilkelly is totally happy to do it because the pay is fantastic, and apparently, according to Saul, he actually likes the prison environment better than living in the outside world.
But there is a snag in the plan, a very bald, very angry snag.
Thanks, Schrader.
Hank is sitting in the surveillance van watching this entire bust go down. The rest of the DEA guys are high-fiving. They think they finally got their big mastermind. But if you look at Dean Norris's face in that scene...
He is absolutely not buying it.
But why? I mean, the evidence is all there. The guy is bald. He is sitting on the right bench. He literally has the blue meth in his pocket.
Because it is too easy. And Hank's true superpower as a character is his gut instinct. Throughout the entire series, Hank is so often portrayed as this loud, boisterous, borderline offensive jock character, but beneath all of that, he is actually an incredible detective.
He really is.
He senses the performative nature of this drug bust. He can't prove it legally, but his gut knows this Kill Kelly guy fits the criminal profile a little too perfectly.
It is such a nice reminder early in the show that Hank is actually a deeply competent adversary for Walt. Saul might be capable of outsmarting the legal system, but he isn't necessarily outsmarting Hank's intuition.
Precisely. But legally speaking, the ruse holds up. So Badger gets his sweet plea deal. He spills the beans on this fake Heisenberg. Kill Kelly goes off to jail. And Walt and Jesse are safe. The crisis is averted.
But Saul is not quite done yet.
No, he is not. And this right here is the moment that completely changes the trajectory of the series. It goes from being a small story about a desperate guy cooking meth to a massive story about building a drug empire.
Saul actually shows up at Walt's high school.
Which is a massive violation of boundaries, by the way. Showing up uninvited at a client's daytime place of work at a high school. Yeah. That is an incredibly aggressive move.
And Walt is furious. He's standing in his classroom, the lighting is drab, everything is gray, and suddenly here comes Saul Goodman scrolling in wearing this impossibly loud suit, looking like a walking neon sign.
But Saul has a pitch ready. He looks right at Walt and tells him, "You are too easy to find." He managed to find Walt in just a couple of hours using a cheap private investigator. And he points out the obvious logic. If he could find Walt that easily, the cops can definitely find Walt. And worse, the cartel can find Walt.
He's essentially telling Walt, you are totally naked out here in the wild, you need some armor.
Exactly. So he offers to be Walt's full-time legal counsel. But it's much more than that. He offers to be a consigliere. He offers to be a full-on advisor in, quote, covering his tracks.
This is a huge shift, because before this exact conversation, Walt is just a guy making really pure drugs in a camper van. After this conversation, he suddenly has access to a criminal infrastructure.
Saul brings the money laundering techniques. He brings the connections to pest control companies for a legitimate cover. He brings the guys who know guys. Saul is the ultimate enabler that allows the Heisenberg persona to grow from a local nuisance to an international kingpin.
It is so fascinating to me that Saul is the one actively courting Walt here. Usually, in these types of stories, the criminal has to seek out the shady lawyer and beg for help. But here, the lawyer is aggressively chasing down the criminal.
Because Saul sees the massive financial potential. He sees the absolute purity and quality of Walt's product. He literally tells Walt, the world is your oyster. It boils down to sheer greed. Saul Goodman is, at his absolute core, an opportunist. He looks at Walter White and he doesn't see a man dying of cancer. He sees a winning lottery ticket that just needs a little help getting cashed.
So while all of this incredibly high-stakes criminal maneuvering is happening in the foreground, there is a very grounded, very human element playing out in the background of this episode. The subplots here are actually quite heavy.
They are very heavy, and they provide the absolute necessary emotional counterweight to all the fast-talking comedy of Saul Goodman. This brings us to section 4 of our deep dive, the human element.
We really have to talk about Hank again here. We mentioned his sharp suspicion during the bust, but emotionally speaking, he is in a very, very dark place in this episode.
He is deeply traumatized. He is suffering from the severe psychological fallout of the shootout in previous episodes.
Right.
You know, the horrific incident down in Juarez, the exploding tortoise on the cartel informant. He has completely holed himself up in his bedroom. He's brewing and bottling his own Schrader Bro beer in the garage. But mostly, he is just hiding from the world. He is having severe, crippling panic attacks.
And Walt, who ironically is the indirect root cause of so much of this cartel chaos, Walt actually steps in here to act as the supportive brother-in-law. He sits down and gives Hank a pep talk.
It is an incredibly complex scene to watch.
Right.
Walt sits on the edge of the bed with Hank and starts talking about his own fear. Or more accurately, his total lack of it.
Yeah, he says he's had, quote-unquote, no fear ever since his terminal lung cancer diagnosis.
Since I got the news, I sleep like a baby. It is a chilling line delivery by Bryan Cranston, because on one hand, you can see he's genuinely trying to comfort Hank. He is trying to say, look, the fear of the unknown is the worst part. You just have to kick it away. But on the other hand, it reveals Walt's rapidly growing nihilism. He is telling Hank that facing his own death didn't make him value life more. It actually made him value consequences a lot less.
But the wild thing is, it actually helps Hank, doesn't it?
It does help him. It gives him just enough mental fortitude to finally leave the house and go back to work. Now, the panic attacks aren't magically and fully cured. It's really just a temporary Band-Aid. But it highlights that incredibly strange dichotomy in Walter White. He can be a ruthless, calculating drug lord in one scene and a genuinely supportive family member in the next, often using the exact same twisted philosophical logic for both situations.
Meanwhile, Jesse is dealing with his own emotional arc in this episode. He's getting much closer to his landlord, Jane.
Jane Margolis, played so wonderfully by Kristen Ritter.
They actually sleep together for the first time in this episode. It's a very sweet, tender moment, actually.
It is. They start bonding over art, over drawing superheroes. It feels very innocent compared to the rest of the show.
Yeah.
But there is a key character detail revealed here that is going to become unspeakably tragic later on. Jesse learns that Jane is in recovery for addiction.
She tells him she's been 18 months sober.
Right. And here is Jesse Pinkman, who is actively manufacturing and dealing crystal meth, using recreational drugs constantly, living this incredibly dangerous, chaotic lifestyle. And he is falling deeply in love with a girl whose very survival depends entirely on stability and strict sobriety.
It is an absolute ticking time bomb of a relationship.
It is the dictionary definition of a doomed romance. As a viewer, you desperately want to root for them because their chemistry is so great and they both seem so lonely, but logically, this dynamic absolutely cannot end well for either of them.
And finally, we have Skylar's subplot.
Right. Skylar is going back to the workforce. She has taken that job with her old boss, Ted Benichetti. And there is this very small, very painful visual detail that Walt notices on a Saturday morning.
He's dressing up for work.
She's spending extra time putting on makeup. She's dressing significantly nicer than she usually does just to go into an office on a weekend.
And Walt notices it immediately. He actually comments on it.
He does notice.
Mm-hmm.
And the dead silence that hangs in the room after he notices speaks absolute volumes. The underlying implication is so clear. There's a massive growing distance between them. Skylar is actively building a completely separate life outside of the home, completely outside of Walt's control. And while Walt is out secretly building his massive criminal empire with Saul Goodman, his actual home life is just quietly, inevitably drifting away from him.
It's such a stark contrast. Walt is rapidly gaining all this power and agency in the dangerous criminal underworld, but he is completely losing his power and connection within his own marriage.
That really is the central driving tragedy of the entire show, isn't it? The higher that Heisenberg rises, the more that Walter White simply fades away.
So we have this incredibly dense crime plot, we have these deeply emotional character beats with Hank and Skylar and Jane, and we have the introduction of an absolute franchise icon all packed into 47 minutes. It is a lot for one single hour of television to handle. Let's look at how the world actually received it when it aired. Moving into Section 5, Reception and Legacy.
The reception was huge. Donna Bowman from the AV Club, who really wrote the definitive must-read weekly recaps of this show back in the day, she gave this episode a straight A grade.
An A grade. That is extremely high praise for what is essentially a mid-season world-building episode.
It really is. She specifically praised the rapidly evolving role of Jesse and Walt within the Albuquerque drug world. She recognized immediately that this wasn't just a funny, quirky episode. It was a massive structural leap forward for the narrative. It fundamentally changed the rules of engagement for the characters.
And looking back at it years later, the historical rankings really hold up. In 2019, The Ringer ranked it the 12th best episode out of all 62 episodes of the series.
That is incredibly high placement when you consider they are putting it up against absolute powerhouse episodes like Ozymandias or Face Off or Crawl Space. To be ranked number 12 is elite status. It beats out some of the most explosive, action-packed season finales.
Vulture also had it ranked at 25th overall, which is still very, very respectable.
Absolutely.
And we really cannot talk about the overall vibe and legacy of this episode without mentioning the music. The music choices in Breaking Bad are always so intentional and atmospheric.
Always. Every track has a purpose. We had Halahe by Fari's Movement playing faintly in the background of the club scene, which perfectly grounds the show in that specific 2009 cultural era. We had Thin Man Skank by the Lions.
And of course, Banderilla by Calexico.
Oh, that Calexico track is the absolute MVP of the episode. It plays during that tense desert kidnapping sequence. It gives the whole scene that distinctive southwestern dusty noir feeling. It has that unique mariachi meets surf rock vibe that just screams border town trouble. It creates a vivid sense of place that is honestly just as important as the dialogue itself.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's try to synthesize all of this information. What is the final verdict here? Why does this specific hour of television matter so much in the grand scheme of things?
It matters deeply because it is the ultimate bridge. Before Better Call Saul the episode, not the spinoff, Breaking Bad was fundamentally a small story about a desperate dying man and his former high school student secretly cooking meth in a beat-up RV. It was small, it was intimate, it was geographically contained.
And after this episode?
After this, it becomes a sprawling saga. Saul Goodman is the conduit that brings the entire underworld to their doorstep. He brings the cartel connections, the sophisticated money laundering, the international shipping routes, the professional hitmen. But even more than that structural stuff, this episode miraculously introduced a character who was originally designed just to be comic relief. Literally a guy in a loud suit making sleazy jokes, and made him complex and compelling enough to eventually carry his own profound Shakespearean tragedy in a prequel series.
It is the ultimate Lalo and Ignacio seed.
Exactly. That tiny little narrative seed, which was just blindly planted in the desert sand in 2009, grew into a massive interconnected forest. It proves that even in the seemingly throwaway panicked moments, this show was diligently building a massive mythology. It is a show that heavily rewards the viewer for paying close attention.
Which perfectly brings us to our final provocative thought for the day. For all of you listening right now.
Right. Think back to that terrifying moment in the desert one more time. Saul is on his knees, staring into what he thinks is his own grave. He begs for his life. And what does he scream? He screams, "I am a friend of the cartel. Amigo del cartel."
He genuinely thinks that title is his ultimate shield. He thinks dropping that name makes him untouchable to these random thugs.
Right, he thinks it is his ultimate safety net. But if you look at the long-term trajectory of Walt, of Jesse, and eventually of Saul himself across both series, is being a quote-unquote friend of the cartel actually safety? Or is it, in reality, the most dangerous exposed position of all?
Because once you establish yourself as a friend, you are officially in the game.
And once you are in the game, there is no getting out. You are really just biding your time, waiting for your own turn to be taken out to the desert.
That is a deeply terrifying, completely sobering thought to leave on. But that is the brutal reality of the Breaking Bad universe. Thank you so much for joining us today on this deep dive into the explosive arrival of the one and only Saul Goodman.
The lid man.
We will catch you on the next deep dive.